So I'd like to welcome everyone to the OTF Connect session, Let's Chat Maker Education with Tina Zita. It's going to be a really fun session, learning all about making things with your students in the class. It looks like a really fun and engaging session and lots to learn. It's always great to have people joining us from all over Ontario for these fabulous sessions, and we're looking forward to learning alongside Tina tonight. So over to you, Tina.
Hi. Sorry, I think it cut out there for a bit, but it's glad to have the sound back. So we're super excited tonight to chat Maker Education, and it's cool that we have a nice group that we can hopefully have a lot of conversations with and see where it takes us. Hopefully you guys can hear me. My name is Tina Zita. I'm a modern learning resource teacher in the Peel District School Board, which means I have the coolest job out there. My job is to support 40 schools from kindergarten to grade 12 in innovating in their practice. Often that involves technology or some different approaches. As we go through tonight, feel free to tweet me if there's something you want to connect with. Yeah. Lisa can attest, I have the coolest job. Feel free to tweet me at any time. Drop your questions in the chat box. We're really hoping that tonight's a conversation, and we're going to try something crazy at the end with a bit of a sketch note brainstorming session, which hopefully will not go awry and will be as awesome as I have imagined in my head. But we're going to just drop the details in. If you do want to connect later, feel free to email me. I am on way too many social media platforms. So tonight is really focused on that conversation around Maker Education, and I know we talk about Maker Ed, and we'll talk a little bit later about all the different words that are kind of out there right now with design thinking and STEAM and STEM. But I think our big idea for tonight really is around the fact that Maker Education is more than just a space. And our hope tonight is that we can really focus in on, if it is in a space, what is it? And how can we see that in each of our practices? And I think the idea that came to mind most of all as I was preparing for tonight was really that idea that in kindergarten you don't need to set up a maker space or maker task. That kids just dive in. We were hanging out in a kindergarten classroom in one of my schools in Peel, and my friend in the picture there was making her own fidget spinner. And it was just crazy to watch because her and her friend had designed them differently based on their choices, I guess you could say. But then I asked them to show me how it worked and asked how was it like a fidget spinner, and it was cool even just to see that conversation of length and measurement coming out in their creation. Creation that was authentic to them because it meant something to them and to the things that they loved. So as we go through tonight, I think that's kind of the guiding piece we want as we move forward. And hopefully it will be that guiding light for us, I guess you could say. So my journey with Maker Ed has been an interesting one. It was probably 3 years now. Can't believe it was 3 years ago. 3 years ago, we started hearing about makerspaces and maker activities. In my superintendency, and at the time I was up in the far north. And we realized, no apologies, Farn, we just got started. So when we were exploring, we realized that in a lot of conversations we were really getting stuck on the fancy gadgets, so the fancy robots, and then we didn't really know what to do with them. So in the north, we actually ended up creating these pop-up maker spaces. And as we were exploring and researching, we realized we really wanted to foster that sense that Maker Ed could be no tech, low tech, and high tech. So I'll give you an example. One of our kits, the Build It kits, for no tech we had Lego, and with the Lego we had a provocation poster, just trying to get kids to see that there's things we can make that involve no fancy gadgets. And then on the high-tech end, we had something that we often don't have access to. So we looked at the idea of cubelets, which are a fairly expensive tool, but one of the only tools I can put in front of anybody and they will start playing, which was super cool. If you've never seen cubelets, seriously, super cool. And then low-tech was that app-based. We have a lot of apps that allow us to make and to create. How can we really tap into that? Because at the time, a lot of our schools had iPads, and it was something that could really continue in their school even when the pop-up makerspace left. Just for those of you, if you're interested in the pop-up makerspace idea, we do have the 3 sets of posters because we had created 3 sets at the time. I think Molly will drop those into the chat box if you want to check them out. For us, though, it was really interesting just to see that back and forth because as much as we were playing, I'm just going to go back to the other page, there was so much learning just in that exploration. So for me, one of the big ones was we had Lego and we had these bins out, and I expected these amazing creations. We used Nathan Sawara. If you've never seen his work, he does these crazy creations with Lego, and had that on the page, expecting all these grand creations, and the kids had created houses, rainbow houses. So I was a little bummed out because that's not quite what we were hoping for. And so we just took some time to ask the kids, like, why did you make the house? Was there anything that was getting in the way? And we suddenly realized that the kids didn't have the pieces they needed to be as creative as we wanted them to be. So you can kind of see, just trying to get my pointer here. Let's see if we can draw right on here. No, it's not going to draw for me. You can see there up in the top right-hand corner, the little Lego creation. I went to the Lego store and we bought the weirdest, funkiest pieces you could ever find. And suddenly their creations just evolved. And I think that's been our whole journey with Maker Education, with my colleagues, with our board, is just really that continual ongoing reflective process of how can we really give students that choice, voice, and opportunity to make and show their learning through that making. So Melly, thanks for dropping the pop-up hashtag. Is there the 3 links perhaps to the 3 Canva files? Feel free if anybody wants to use those files, reuse them, feel free. That's what they're there for. The Twitter link doesn't work? There we go. So there's the posters. Lisa, you'll have to let us know if that works. As we were going along, oh, sorry, Lisa, it's the TAC link probably. TAC went down. So we had this lovely summary of the pop-up experience, and then TAC decided to no longer exist, which was a bummer. For us, the learning over the last little year has been then moving into design thinking, because the biggest question we kept getting as we did our pop-ups and as we were chatting was, where are the curriculum links? So that's really been our exploration. We'll share a little bit more about that journey as we go along, but as we get started, we really wanted to learn a little bit more about you. So our goals tonight are to get to know each other a bit better, to start that conversation around Maker Education and what does it look like to you in your practice. We want to come to those different words and definitions that folks are using and come to a kind of a common consensus. And then we want to see the connections to our classroom practice and those curricular goals. and brainstorm some ideas together so we can leave with some practical ways we can make in our classroom. Hopefully folks are cool with that. All right, time for introductions. So in the chat box on the side, if you just want to introduce yourself, tell us a bit about yourself. We can't wait to learn a bit more. Jay, we'll have to brainstorm some ideas tonight. So glad to have you here. Can't wait to hear your suggestions and ideas. Glad to have you with us too, Jen. We saw all of your knitting activities last week come to mind. Nice to have you with us, Monica. Cool, Laura. Hope we can get you some ideas. We'll have to maybe use your grade 6 friends, grade 3 friends in your STEM club as a jumping off point for our brainstorming. Glad to have you with us, Maddie. And Malti, hopefully I'm saying your name right. Glad to have you with us, Andrea. It's cool that we're all from different boards. This is awesome. Northeastern Ontario sounds very far away, Farin. Wow, Jen, that sounds like a cool job. Almost as cool as mine. Andrea, and that's a really cool point. We're finding a lot of kids that are drawn to the maker test are students that don't always feel success in those academic activities. So how can we really bring that engagement that we see in those maker activities and link it to those curricular tasks we have in the classroom? Iroquois Falls, cold. I'm sorry. It is so cold everywhere, but I'm sure it is much colder up your way. I feel like I want to look it up on a map now. I know, Cyril. We have like have a super group. Minus 47. Oh my goodness. Cool. Yeah, and you've played with so many ideas. That's awesome. I found we had Makey Makeys in one of our pop-up kits, and it was definitely a harder sell with the pop-ups. We ended up buying Bloxels. Something with Makey Makeys and just being cables really freaked people out. Even the kids. It was interesting. That's awesome. All right, so this is cool. So cool to learn about each of you. So keep adding those introductions as you join in. We just want to kind of get a sense, just an overview. So if you wanted to take one of those little sticker clip art things you used before and just put it in the corner that best represents you for what division you teach. I know folks have kind of dropped that in, but just will give us a general sense of the group. Very cool, Stephanie. Laura, once you get going with the Makey Makeys, it's so exciting. We're really stoked. We have 2 art teachers that next week we're going to start exploring the Makeys with their art classes for interactive art. So can't wait to see where the kids take it. So a couple primary folks, a couple junior folks. You can put yourself, Jennifer, at the a bit of everything, or you can drop it into the chat window like Aziza and Jen already have done. Thank you guys for going with the flow there throughout that bit. I think we span the age group, which is super cool. So I think we can really think of a lot of different ideas. Or even thinking how we can take an idea and tweak it for different grades, which is awesome. So since we're talking about Maker Education, we really want to think about getting started and exploring really what we've made lately. And for me, I think I always find when I think about what I've made, food comes to mind. I'm a big baker. I can't really cook, but I can bake. The other thing that comes to mind is photography. And sometimes I think we forget how often we make as the day goes on and as our weeks go on, and how much that's a part of our sense of being, I guess. We're all creative beings in one way or another. So let's brainstorm all the ways we've made lately. So you can either add your ideas to the screen with the text box, that's at 1 with the A there, or you can put it into the chat window. There you go, Jen. You already made something. That is perfect timing. Makeys definitely can make you feel like a student, just catching up on that discussion there. Zita, that sounds very interesting to using it as an iPad, with the iPad. So just for those that haven't used it before, on the panel on the left-hand side, you have a little text box option. It's the 4th option down with the A and the lines. And you can just click on the page, or you can put it into the box, chat box. Just some of the ways you've made lately. I love that you made dinner. Mine's still waiting. I'll have to make it later. We do make and create and design those report cards, comments, and communication of learning comments. That is awesome. First test knits for designers. Ooh, a lot of people have been making dinner. Oh, sewing. I haven't sewed since I was a kid. Still want to do it. The other thing I wanted to try to take back up is knitting, but haven't got to that point yet. It's funny how I've started I took a photography course in the fall, and it's funny how many times you start trying to compose your own pictures, setting them up and all that jazz. Knitting and quilting. Ooh, yeah, first dibs on those patterns. That's pretty awesome. Right, and that's how we learn. That is super cool, Stephanie. Love that. What were some of the stations you had? some green screen pictures. So lots of great ideas. I think one of the reasons I like to think about what we've made lately is that, one, we often don't think of a lot of the things we do in education. So ideas from making our lesson, designing our lesson plans, or creating those provocations, exploring those different areas. I think that's as much making as a lot of the other pieces we see. But also that making isn't really something unique to education. So we're in a do-it-yourself kind of era in social media, even, between the YouTube tutorials to your Instagram posts or blog posts. It definitely is part of our 21st century culture. So how can we really tap into that? One of the ones that was really super cool, and I'm seeing Lisa has the mad science there, we were chatting one day with a colleague, an instructional coach colleague, and we were trying to think of how we could engage some grade 4s in their science topic, and it was around matter and materials and chemical changes versus physical changes. And we realized, why not tap into the slime making craze? One, I didn't know that many slime videos could possibly be available online. That was a lesson for me. But it was really cool. I was super bummed I didn't get to do it with them. But it was super cool to hear how much the students were engaged and how they could make those connections between their conversations in science and then that making task of the slime. So super cool to be able to tap into those interests and those explorations that they're doing at home. So super cool ideas, from birthday parties to puppets to green screen, and lots of knitting. Awesome. Oh, Laura, I know they, I'm trying to think, Elmer's Glue now makes their own mixture. You don't need to use borax. You can use the contact solution, which I think still has the same acid in it, so I don't know if that's any better. But I went and hunted it down because that borax made me a little worried too. I think when we come to Maker Education, many ideas kind of come to mind, and one of the founders of the approach, we often hear about Mitch Resnick and all of his work, the creator, one of the founders of Scratch and the Lifelong Kindergarten Lab, but also the forefather was Seymour Papert. And this quote really always struck me because I think it really helps us see that connection again back to our classroom practice, and not just for some friends, that we've always known that kids learn best by actually making something that's meaningful to them. And I think it's a good highlight as we move forward with our conversations. Has anybody seen this quote before? Even just give us a happy face. We'll leave it on for a second before we move on. I'm glad you love it, Laura. Yes, it's one of those great quotes to kind of guide us. Ooh. Yeah, I've never, I can't say I'm that good to have gone back that far. Papert's work always is fascinating, though. So it seems like we have a lot of folks that have had experience with MakerEd. So maybe just, I don't know, Molly, if we had this set up as a vote, or maybe we can just have people in the chat box say where they would put themselves. But if you had to, oh, see, people are already doing it. Fantastic. I think we have them putting it in the chat box. That's okay. So a lot of threes right now. So since a lot of us have had experiences with MakerEd, we're going to maybe build on those experiences and have you share some of those experiences if that's cool in the chat box, just so that it extends our learning as a group. So maybe as people are still voting, we may have one or two more still there. If you just want to tell us what was your favorite MakerEd experience that you've had so far. It could be with a club, it could be in your classroom. See some folks typing away. I think one of my favorite maker or constructivist experiences recently was some green screen work with some kindergarten friends. We kind of took that green screen and came up with a completely different idea for it. We had it on the floor, it was draped around us, and it just really challenged my thinking. And that voice and choice certainly came out. Designing bridges, Cyril, that's cool. And some longhouses. Lego marble mazes, very cool. Jason, I loved your Bebot challenges. Those look super cool. Stop motion, Lisa, if there is one app and one tool I wish I could have every kid try, it would be stop motion. But there's so many possibilities for connections across the curriculum. Scratch, very cool. I think Scratch is one of those ones that's another really powerful tool. We were using Scratch Junior recently to code our own stories around forces, and amazing to hear student voice come out as they were describing gravity. It was comical. A haunted house fort, ooh. Stop motion and the green screen. Helicopter landing pads. Sounds like some good testing moments. Oh, Jen, that is awesome. I think that's one of the coolest parts about MakerEd, is really seeing kids in that state of flow. When they're so engaged, it's awesome. Oh, Laura, was that the MakerEd TO conference you went to? I was so bummed I couldn't go. I was teaching for OISI at the time. Wow, Lisa, that is amazing. Very cool. All right, folks. Since you've had a lot of experience with MakerEducation, or we have a lot of experience as a group, and even if you don't have a lot of experience, what are some of those questions that you're burning to chat about as a group? In addition to where do we get stuff cheap? I think that's always a question that comes up. Yeah, those open-ended tasks are always a struggle. That will come lead into one of our conversations pretty shortly too. And that's a great point too. I think we're going to share a bit of a continuum, and it's just my own kind of pondering, so I'd love to hear your feedback and to see what you guys think. Because we often see that with Makerspace, right? It becomes a space or an exploration area, but how do we see that maker concept connected to the curriculum and not just as an extra? Great point, Jen. How do we keep it manageable in our spaces? I know the messy part sometimes just it's a struggle. How to get other staff on board. Cool. That is so true. You want to put them kind of in their own little booth. That they can't extend past that booth. I find even just in my own condo, when I take things for the pop-up makerspaces and trying to bring them back, it's a mess everywhere. Really effective storage. Maybe that's a good maker task, getting kids to design effective storage. There we go. How do we store it all? So we'll let you, if you still have questions, just drop them into the chat window. We want to move on a little bit, if that's okay. And moving on to that idea around what the different terms are out there. Andrea, that's a great question of how do we help students kind of take that step and that risk? Because it's often a challenge with some friends. And making it cost effective. Monica, that's a great question too. We learned that the hard way when we did the pop-up makerspaces. We wanted origami and I thought it would be this clever idea. And I watched one class go through $50 worth of origami paper in an hour. And I was having a little meltdown. So there definitely are those pieces that hold us back sometimes. I know. So we want to move on and just see if we can solidify a couple pieces. We want to look at kind of the terms that are out there and their similarities and see what you guys think. Then we also want to see if we can connect it to the global competencies and where we see some of those elements come to play, and then see that continuum that we were talking about before we get into the brainstorming. I'll never buy origami paper again, folks. I learned my lesson. So I think one of the hard parts I find right now, especially as we're going into different classrooms, is just those 3 different words that we're hearing out there. I think we definitely see the conversation around maker education. Some people call it makerspace. Some people go old school and call it constructionism. We have the STEAM and the STEM, and we have that design thinking. So one of the things I did recently was I just went through to see just the different definitions that are out there. And it was interesting to see that problem-based inquiry, authentic problems, critical thinking all came into play. And definitely how they all had that sense of making or an idea of making that kind of held them together. Does anybody else feel like the terms are at odds? For me, it was just the hard part because I think in education we love different terminology, but once we get different terms in, folks can kind of get stuck sometimes in the different pieces. And helping people see how they have that common thread. And I think creativity and making is that common thread that we all can move forward with, no matter what kind of activity it is. Yeah, definitely, Lisa. A good point that sometimes with the maker activities we go in with our own interests, and design thinking really gives us that chance to think of others as we're making. And I think loose parts is a great piece around that. And I know as we were chatting earlier around the kindergarten classroom, it really is a similar experience. For our makerspaces, our pop-up makerspaces, one of our provocations was just Andy Goldsworthy prints, as well as the Syrian artist that does the beautiful work and illustrations with stones. His name escapes me right now. I wish I had it handy. It's in the poster, I believe. So yeah, a great place for our loose parts to fit into that whole sense of making and creating. Glad to have you with us, Carrie. And I think that's where I've seen the benefits, and we've already talked about that tonight a little bit. One of the pieces I think that when we have conversations around maker education, we really see that choice and voice. And I know we've talked about choice and voice being so important, especially in our inquiry conversations. But we really see a lot of our learners striving when they're given that choice and voice. Just even watching kids and their Lego creations has been amazing just to see where it takes them. I think the other, thank you, Monica. I think the other piece that I really love about maker education is, and we've seen this with coding, we see it with a lot of our Genius Hour explorations, that suddenly kids are living that risk and that failure that we say we want them to kind of embody. And we see them experiencing that growth mindset. You never have to tell a kid with a video game that they need to reflect on what they could do better and try it again. They just do it. And I think we see that more in maker education than we would per se in a traditional school task. And then I think we see a lot of those 21st century competencies. And I know a lot of us probably have seen them or explored them. I know some of us that have chatted together before in OTF have looked at them. But if Molly wouldn't mind just dropping the 2 links in, if you haven't checked them out before, the second link is the full document. But if you want a closer look, this is just a sketch note we created for our Empowering Modern Learner vision in Peel. But the first one will give you the 6 different elements that the ministry's outlined as those 21st century global competencies and some indicators, looking from critical thinking and problem solving to collaboration and communication, that innovation and creativity. So if you just want to take a minute to look at that resource, or if you're really familiar with it and you just want to drop those words in. Sorry, can you hear me now? Maybe? No? Okay. Monica and Laura can hear me, hopefully. All right, cool stuff. When did it cut out? I'll go over it again, and hopefully it works for folks. Okay, cool, Laura. Thanks. So I got a little too comfortable here, I guess. Sorry about that, folks. So just looking back at the global competencies, thank you, Lisa. If you just want to think a little bit about where do you see the links, it's the 2 global competency links that I put in. Thanks for joining us, Kevin. Where are you from, Kevin? While we get the links up. Close by. There you go, Kevin. So glad to have you. Thanks, Mally, for dropping it in. So if you guys want to click on the framework, it will give you some more ideas. And maybe we can chat a little bit about the connections we're seeing. Sorry for the lag, Molly. I'm connected right into my modem. Sorry, and I definitely think we see them all, don't we? I think when I think back to those very first times we tried out the pop-up makerspaces, what stood out to me the most was the piece around collaboration and the communication. I can picture some of the kids with the cubelets or some of the kids with the Lego, and just really seeing them engaged in that conversation. But just to Monica's point about loose parts, I think I can see that when we look even at innovation and creativity. And that's it, isn't it, Lisa? That as much as we see these 6 competencies in isolation, I think we always see that overlap, especially between critical thinking and problem solving and innovation, and that idea around collaboration and communication. The one that really has me kind of reflecting, and I know from the original discussion paper to the framework that you guys are checking out, the learning to learn changed to self-directed learning. And some of those elements in there around perseverance, around reflection, goal setting, were really interesting. Yeah, design thinking definitely brings that critical thinking element in. The other thing that came to mind with the critical thinking and problem solving is the steps that we see. A great point there, Kevin, around that move that we want to see in the classroom for sure. Byron, and that's a great point. One of the things we're chatting about in Peel tomorrow for one of our Twitter chats are the global goals. So especially with some of our older kids, just getting the link here for you. So just even in particular chatting with some of our older kids, can we get them to be designing and looking at solutions around some of those global goals? And I'm wondering, and this is just completely wondering out loud, what do those global goals or designs for those global goals look like on that global level, but also on the local level? So when I look at hunger, solutions for hunger will be different based on the communities that I'm tackling. And can we help students look at those issues both locally and globally? Experts is a really great idea as well. I know we have a classroom in Peel that's looking at designing roller coasters, and I got some engineers in to Skype with them and give them some feedback, which is just absolutely amazing. But we've been seeing that with newscasters, right? There's so many ways we can call on those experts to make those connections. So if you have more connections, I think parent interviews are later this week, but it's a busy week for a lot of folks. And again, when we come to those 21st century competencies, this quote always, I'll definitely tell them that, Stephanie. That's a great point. This quote really always stood out to me from Mitch Resnick. It was in one of his articles because I think it really summarized all the 21st century competencies we talked about, and it's kind of that goal that we want when we're looking at maker education or maker tasks in the classroom, or the reason why we do what we do. So I think the biggest question I get is really that question around where is the curriculum? I don't know, you guys can just give me an emoji if right beside your name if you want to, if you've ever gotten this question. Because I think a lot of times, again, we see maker education as something that maybe is something we do as a club or an area, something that we explore, but it isn't always something we see that's connected to the curriculum. And it's been something that I've really been trying to tackle and get my head around, especially if you want to move from that sense that making only happens in a space, although makerspaces are super cool and awesome, but also that we can move to an idea that we can be making in the classroom in our everyday practice. There you go. I feel that that's a lot of us are probably in that position as we're trying to bring colleagues on board. And it was kind of funny because I finally had this aha moment. And we do have a link there if you want a page that's a little prettier than this. And that is so true. The next question is always, how do we assess it? So this continuum may not help with the assessment piece, but hopefully the continuum definitely helps us see its place. And maybe it does come into the assessment piece, actually. So when full day kindergarten first came out, they came out with the egg. Did anybody ever see the egg when full day kindergarten first came out? And Mally, there's the two links there. One links to the official, the original kindergarten continuum, and another links to our Transformational Practices iBook, just a book we worked on, but one of the sections under Rich Tasks, we have this as a visual if you wanted to check it out. So when full day kindergarten first came out, they had this really cool continuum. People called it the kindergarten egg. And on the one end, you had that laissez-faire, I'm going to sit back and you're going to get to play piece. And on the other end, we had that didactic teaching of let me sit you down and tell you what to do. And in the middle was kind of that sweet spot we wanted to be in, that back and forth between child-initiated play activities and then these playful experiences that the teacher would bring to the students to extend and expand their thinking. And then I suddenly had this aha moment when we were trying to make sense of it all, and I realized we probably go through that same continuum when we look at Maker Education as well. And I don't think those ends are definitely bad, but I do think we want to be in that sweet spot again. So I think we can see those moments where we're just exploring and it's just kids choosing to do what they want to do with the materials in the space. And we sometimes have more of those step-by-step maker activities, especially when we're first learning how to do circuits, etc., where we're following those steps. But ideally, we want to be in that middle space of student-initiated making and then those places where we provoke or invite them to make and kind of extend their learning there. Thanks, Lisa, for joining. And coming back to that assessment piece, I think that's where that assessment kind of differs. If students are initiating their own making, then we're going to capture their, we're going to have to use our observations to really capture the curricular concepts that are being addressed. Whereas if we're using that provoking, which I think where design challenges can really fit in, we can use that big idea in the curriculum as a starting off point and really use that as that curriculum link so that we can capture student thinking that way. Does that kind of make sense to folks? Has it been presented that way to people before? Maybe I'm completely crazy. But I think putting it in the continuum can help us, one, for those assessment conversations, but also two, to come back to our understanding of what's our role in that space or in that experience. The Seymour Papert quote, I can type it back up into the chat window, just 1 second. Monica, there you Bill, children learn best when they are actively engaged in constructing something that has personal meaning to them. I think that's one of the hard parts too with the look, listen, and learn in the design challenges, is coming up with design challenges that are meaningful to the kids, and not just things that we think we would like, which is always a bit of a struggle, isn't it? So just to illustrate it a bit, I thought I'd share a little bit about a story I had with design thinking. So it was kind of interesting. We had a school that was exploring, they had a really cool iLab with awesome materials. And the first time, the teacher actually came to me and she just said, I want to make more purposeful use of the space. How can we make more purposeful use of the space? So one of the things that we actually did was we did the chair design challenge. Did anybody do that before? You can leave me a note in the chat box. So the chair design challenge is like a standard design challenge that a lot of folks do. And it comes from the design school at Stanford, the D school, D Stanford. And we adapted it a little bit for the kids. So we chose 4 characters. We said they could design for an astronaut, a baby, an older person, or for a friend. Lesson learned, never ask grade 2, 3 kids if they want to design for a friend. They all think it's super cool to design for a friend and have no clue what a friend needs. And then we took them through the whole design process. So we had them sketch it out, then we had them use materials in the classroom, and then they got to prototype with any materials that they wanted to use. And it was really cool just to see some of the thinking of kids. So at first they thought they couldn't mix materials, so that was a big aha for us. Was trying to help them kind of see that different materials could be used together within the makerspace. But to me, what was super cool was just watching our friends, oh, I found the pointer, there we go. Watching our friends. So here you can kind of see our friend was designing his vehicle here for his chair for his friends. And it was just one of those moments where it just hits you that they have this understanding that you might have never noticed. So he was designing his chair and we ran out of these magnetic blocks, and he was trying to balance his chair out. So as he went, he counted on one side and said 20, then said, oh, I just need 10. And I said, how did you know that? Or how did you figure that out? And he said, well, I know that half of 20 is 10. And when we talk about those opportunities really for that noticing and naming the learning that we were seeing, I think what an awesome opportunity to really be noticing those mathematical behaviors that came to play, in addition to all of those 21st century competencies we already talked about. So we followed up with the same group, and we wanted to really dive a little deeper with empathy. And we were finding that the kids the first time really struggled with just the concept of designing for someone else and not just kind of building what they thought was cool. So we actually used these guys here. Has anybody played with the Extraordinaires before? And Molly, there's a couple links there if you want to put them in to the Chair Design Challenge and the Extraordinaires game. So the Extraordinaires game has a couple pieces. You can get a large set or there's smaller sets. So in the smaller sets, I just picked up, this one's a structure kit. So you get these character cards. So this is the astronaut, and on the back of the card, there's actually 2 scenes of his life. So what I love about these cards is there's no text. So one, we can use them at different grade levels. They're not really going to get stuck on that. It's called Extraordinaires. The other thing that's cool is that all of our learners can really, I'll get the link while I'm sharing. All of our learners can really kind of jump in with it. So it was really cool because this guy, when you looked at the back, you could see that he had a family and that he had a dog. So I'm just going to drop that in here. There you go. And then their task with the game, we got it at the same time there, Mally. With the game, you can actually do a couple things. With the game, you're able to pull a structure card and then to pull a think card. So your structure card would tell you what kind of structure to design, which is awesome because we have structures in grade 1, grade 3, grade 5, and it goes all the way up. The other cool thing, though, is that they come with these think cards, which have some reflective questions for you to think about when you're designing. Since these guys were working on forces, we just decided to bypass that and just say they needed to design a vehicle or an object that would help their character move and help us understand what forces they were using. So once they thought of their needs, they sketched out their plan, and then again they prototyped with the materials in the classroom. And it was just amazing to hear the thinking and the thoughtfulness that went into their designs because we used those cards. So just to show you here, I have the shadow puppet. So we just used shadow puppet as a reflection tool. Let me see if I can get it in there for you guys. If you want to click on it and check it out. Oh, I put it all right on the page. Sorry about that, guys. So it's just in the box. Shadow Puppet's a free app that you can put on an iPad or an iPhone. It lets you take your pictures and then just record on top of it. So we took pictures from the card to their designs and then their prototype, and they just explained their thinking a little bit. So if you have a chance while you're watching or after you've watched, if you want to drop any questions that you have into the box, I'm also going to get the chair design challenge for you there. Did it work for folks? Were you able to see the clip? See Monica's adding in. We're just getting the slide deck for the chair challenge there for anybody that wanted to use it. It was funny that we went with the chair challenge because at the time we were thinking of actually having them do design around earthquakes and structures, and then realized maybe it was a bit too much for grade 2. So the app we used was just Shadow Puppet. The reason I like Shadow Puppet, especially coming back to our assessment conversation, Shadow Puppet's really simple, so you just take your pictures and push record. They can't really get stuck in a lot of bells and whistles. So I'm just dropping the link in there for you guys if you wanted it. So for that reflection piece, it really made it nice and quick so that the kids didn't really get stuck in making it look fancy and rather in capturing their thinking. I literally passed my phone to these girls and just said, oh, could you tell me about your creation? And we took the 3 pictures and they went with it, which was pretty awesome. So keep your questions coming. Let us know how it's, if there's comments or notes you guys have. I liked, Monica, it's funny with those mixing of materials, isn't it? It took them a long time to realize that they could mix materials. I don't know why. Maybe we always do have materials separately. So as we look at those activities or those ideas, we know we kind of want activities that give students that choice and that voice and that allow them to engage in the learning actively. So what we want to do now is we want to brainstorm maybe some curriculum links to some maker tasks. So maybe you have an area of the curriculum you're exploring. I loved Ruben Pontedera, the guy that created Sammer, had a great way where he said either pick something that you love or pick something that isn't working or something you need to change, because those will all be things that you're willing to kind of stick with as you're changing your practice. So I'm going to just switch over. I'm going to put my iPad up on the screen, and we're going to do a little bit of sketching. So if somebody in the group has a topic they want to explore or an area of the curriculum that they're really going to tackle soon, maybe it's more of a literacy or a numeracy lens, let us know in the chat box. And we're hoping that maybe we can pick 3 different areas that we could brainstorm and chat about. So feel free to drop those into the chat box as we get my iPad up on the screen. I was talking to myself there, folks, sorry. So Kevin, I see yours is math, and I see Melanie's is math. Melanie, what kind of technology do you have access to? Kevin, it looks like you have so much. That's awesome. And Kevin, we were just chatting ideas, so we're good to kind of explore. Laura, looking at flight. Some cool options there with some design challenges. Whoa, Melanie, that sounds super cool with the idea of designing their own space. We have some schools doing that as well. All right, so why don't we pick, the first one's going to be math, and maybe then we'll move on to the then on to flight, and maybe we can do learning space. Cool, so we're just using paper 53 here. I'm going to try to do this. This may not work, but we'll try it out. So we just want to think of some of the connections to math that we could do with Makerspace. So I think one of the ideas that always comes to mind with making and that open-ended piece, right? We want them to kind of explore. The idea that really comes to mind is maybe mazes. I don't know if that comes to mind to anybody else, and I know Jay talked about doing that with his kids. And I'm wondering, just even with the mazes, that's my poor attempt at a maze. What I like about the mazes is that we really could be using different robots. So Kevin, how you said you have both the spheros and dot and dash, how we could probably use them both to help us with those mazes. And I could see that you could kind of use different challenges. So we could either have a challenge or the design task that asks them to use their understanding about angles. We could give somebody else a design challenge that focuses more on area. And even with their younger friends, maybe we give them a challenge that's focused around shapes or even measurement in general, so that they have to use those shapes. We've often used the 100 carpets when it comes to doing the shape mazes, just because it's a bit easier for them to kind of add those shapes to their exploration. Anybody else have any ideas for math and MakerEd while I keep adding? Oh, location and movement on a grid, Jennifer? Because I think that could be another piece, right? Whether you use the mazes or not, we could really have that grid idea or movement on a map. We talked about that for grade 2s last week, and just that idea of movement and positional language when we're dealing with a map. And please forgive my very poor representation of the world there. It doesn't really look like the world, but that's a map, folks. That's what we're going with. Because we really can use that positional language and the movement piece. Oh, Jason, I love that idea of bringing ramps in and slopes. Now I have to try to figure out how to bring that in. So even with one simple task like design your own maze, we can take that same task if we're in the library space and allow kids to change the maze based on what they're learning about. So that that one design challenge really could meet their understanding in different ways. Linear relations with spheral. Ooh. Distance, speed, rotations, measurement and time. Now I have to try to get these all on here, folks. So we're going to put time and distance. Hopefully that works. Kevin, that's a great point. I love the grid that we see in Scratch Junior. I think that really brings so many really cool conversations into play. Well, looks like a pig, not a scratch, but that's okay. I'm usually better at this, folks. Not quite sure, but that's okay. The other idea that came to mind as we're looking at some of those explorations, just coming back to some of the tools you have there, Kevin, with the Ozobots, I'm wondering just even around shapes and tessellations, could we have Ozobots somehow illustrate that? I love the trick-or-treating and story mapping. Oh, well, that's a great point too, right? We could really draw the path with the Ozobot, with the grid for our math. This is my attempt at an Ozobot. We were just exploring it in grade 2. That's one of the expectations, is to discuss the path from one place to the other. Yeah, and all of our robots could really do the drawing of the polygons, couldn't they? So I know we've done it before with Dash, just with the markers stuck to them. I don't know if that's always the easiest way of doing it, but it definitely is a cool way to kind of give students that option to explore. And I think the hard part, again, is always coming up with ideas that allow for that open-ended exploration, right? That chance that they're still designing and have that choice and voice as they're creating with the different characters. Don't like that. Cool. Definitely, Kevin. And the other thing, like we've talked about a lot of robots, but one of the things that I would maybe even consider, and we've done this a bunch of times, I'm just going to draw the little, is stop motion's fantastic for transformational geometry. So the idea of having kids create their own design is fantastic with transformational geometry. So one of my favorite apps for stop motion is called Stop Motion Studio. And one of the reasons why it's my favorite is that it's both iPad and Android, iPhone, and tablet. So a fantastic app for a variety of devices. We did this with grade 2 last week, and two of the kids went home and made videos that night, which was super cool. And growing and shrinking patterns too, so for sure, I'm just going to try to write those down here so we remember. And we'll just do, this is our symbol for growing patterns and shrinking patterns. Cool. Look at that. Look at all those great ideas. We are rocking it. So what was that second idea? The idea of flight. So what are some of the ideas folks have for flight and some design challenges or tasks? So thinking of flight, I think we always think of the paper airplane idea, right? The can you fold and design a paper airplane? And I kind of love that because it reminds us that we have been making for a long time. Thanks for joining us, Jen. So I think even just having a design challenge like that, I'm wondering though, and that's a cool idea of designing a model in Tinkercad. I know that Tinkercad did at one point have some different design ideas, and I'm doing the colors wrong. Sorry, folks. I know it's 4 squares. But having them design their ideal solution, I'm trying to think of some of the so design a new aircraft, maybe. Be interesting to take into consideration some of the things you're exploring already in other areas. Very cool, Jen, about designing in Tinkercad. The social studies and the castles. I was wondering, the one thing I was thinking about was maybe some of those global goals again. And maybe could we design a more affordable way to fly? I wonder if that would get into some of the conversations around the 4 forces, but also looking at the cost and the environmental impacts of flight. Or if you could get a scenario where we need to support somebody to fly. Just thinking out loud. So I'm going to just put that as a little question mark there of can we see a connection to the global goals. there was this school, and I know this sounds crazy, so Laura, the thing that came to mind, and I don't know if it's enough though for all of the 4 forces, that's why I'm questioning myself here. There was these kids that they had to go to school, and their school was on the other hill. So they would actually take a zip line across this big valley so that they could actually go to school each day. So I wonder with something like that, if you could almost create a scenario, they could design something and design their prototype that then they could test. And Kevin, you have some cool suggestions there. Let's just make sure we make a note of that so we remember. I don't know how to draw a plane now. There we go. But definitely check out Tinkercad because they have lesson plans and some of them may actually, oops, sorry. Ooh, drones. Jason, love that idea. And that drone that got in the way of the plane this week. Boeing. We'll keep that in there. And drones. Let's see if we can. Getting them to design their own drone would be pretty awesome. I don't even know what a drone looks like. I just realized that as I started working. That is a terrible drone. But designing their own drones would be pretty super cool. So many possibilities. It's a super cool idea, Jason. I like the drones too because I think it can come back to some of those elements. Parachuting. Something I would never do. Don't think I could ever be that bold. Oh, Jan, that's an awesome story. I also, last fall, I went to the EDIT conference, the design conference, or exhibit, I guess you could say, down in Toronto. They had it at the old soap factory. And Autodesk, which I didn't realize is in Toronto, which is the creators of Tinkercad and all of the design tools, they had kids actually design, kids that did have amputees, young amputees, design alternatives. So there was this girl that created a sparkler glitter gun as her cool prosthetic, which was just off the charts amazing. Such a cool story of empowerment that we could really bring into the classroom. So we have some math ideas there and some flight ideas. I'm just noticing the time. And we did want to share a couple resources for you, if that's okay. Do you guys mind if we switch over? Thank you guys for doing this. I'm sorry, hopefully I got to capture most of your ideas in there. And we'll tweet this out, but then we'll also email it to Molly so it can go on the resource collection for you guys later. So I'm just going to stop sharing, but if you want to keep adding to the box, that's cool. Just give me 1 second. All right. So I can't believe our time's coming to an end. It has been awesome chatting with all of you. You guys have such amazing ideas. It's so cool to hear from your experiences and to brainstorm together. So I just wanted us to leave with a few resources, and because you guys are just a wealth of information, you may have some go-to resources that you want to drop in to the chat window as well. So a couple hashtags that I love, MakerEd of course, but one that we don't often go to is the Maker. So actually in the bottom corner where you see Chrissy Vensdale here, I'm just going to point her out again. So Chrissy Vensdale was kind of one of the first people I followed that really was into Maker Education. She makes a lot of those amazing posters. She's a big maker herself. She actually founded this hashtag Maker, which is just cool because sometimes in MakerEd we see a lot of older examples, and Maker brings us to some great elementary examples, which I love. I know STEAM. Now I know a lot of school boards have their own STEAM hashtags. If you know one, drop it into the chat window. I know in Peel, some people use PDSB STEAM. But I know TDSB has a rockin' hashtag going on. And I think those three hashtags really are my go-tos, especially when I'm trying to find some ideas. But I do find that each of the tools kind of has their own hashtag. So, for example, Makey Makeys, I usually just look at Makey Makeys for some inspiration. Thanks. That's a cool, I'll have to check that hashtag and that handle out. Loving it. Book-wise, I know there's a ton of different books out there. I think the two that kind of that stood out to me were Worlds of Making. Worlds of Making was kind of that first book on Maker Education. I do like it because it's a quick read, and quick reads are always awesome. Quick and short and sweet. The other thing I like about Laura Fleming's book was that it was very step by step. So for new people that are coming into Maker Education, if you're trying to bring people on board, definitely a great read. But last year we read Launch, and I do find with Launch just so many different opportunities to really just dive right in. So if you're looking for a practical way to get into design thinking, those different stages of Launch are key. And just the sentence starters alone, or the ideas of how to get started, just really, really practical. So I love that we have some folks that have read Laura's book and Launch. That's great. Does anybody have any other go-to reads that were kind of on the top of your list when it comes to Maker Education? I know a lot of reads for me lately have focused more on creativity as a whole than necessarily just Maker Education, but there's tons of great folks out there that you could follow when it comes to MakerEd. I think Melanie, I know I was just listening to a colleague that shared today. At the Malk, we have Chris Sherman in Peel that does some great stuff. Jay's doing amazing stuff. Lots of people are doing really cool stuff. Stephanie, the Maker Movement Manifesto sounds super cool. Is that the one with the black cover and the white chalk writing? I think I have the wrong one. I think that's how to get started on your Makerspace. It's on my to-read list right now. Gonna check it out right as we speak. Well, if you have any ideas that you want to add to the chat, keep adding them in. White cover, and the words are in different materials. Oh, yes, I've seen that one. It looks cool. Did you like it? Sorry, Stephanie, I'm making you write like a crazy one. That's not very nice of me. There you go. Thank you for saving me. Your starter guide to Makerspaces. Awesome. So some other books to add to our list. So maybe we'll add that into that black last column of our sketch note, just some of those different starting places. So if you have another handle or hashtag that you think we should check out, drop it into the discussion box there. But yeah, thank you so much for such a great conversation tonight. It's been awesome learning with all of you. I feel like every time we do these chats, I get to learn new things. And I think there's a couple items they want us to do. Thanks for that, Mally. Sorry. So I think Mally's typing in the box if you guys do have a moment. So I think if they always love getting your feedback. So if you click on that bit.ly, I think it will take you to a feedback form. And at the end of the feedback form, you get your certificate. Did I get that right, Mally? Oh, awesome. I'm glad I'm getting it down pat. We are going to be doing another session in March around augmented reality and virtual reality, if that's something folks are interested in. And there's a long list of great sessions coming up this month. It's a great collection.
Okay, is my mic back?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. So sorry, everyone. I'm not sure what happened. So as Tina said, thanks for everything. That was really fantastic. I loved all the ideas in that sketch note. And Tina, if you can send me the link, I'll put it in the resources. There are more webinars coming up, and we go right until the March break. So if there's something else you see, we'd love to have it put to have you join us, and they're all listed on the OTF website. And finally, there's still funding left for mathematics, technology, and kindergarten. And you can look on the OTF website and be able to find out how you can apply for that. But I'm going to go back to the feedback link because that's really important to us and to Tina and to the ministries. If you could fill that in, and we'd very much appreciate it, and you'll be able to download your certificate once you've finished that. So thanks everyone for coming, and great discussions. It looks like people have amazing things going on in their classroom, and such an exciting time for students and teachers to be in education. And thanks for all the resources, Tina. That was just great.
Thanks for having me. Always a fun night.